Hey fam, I want you to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications. Let's talk about what took place. We just finished within the last hour at Texas Southern University in Houston, Texas. There was a presidential candidate forum focusing on issues of importance to women of color. It's called She the People. It's the first time ever we've had an event with this focus. Aimee Allison, who launched She the People and organized the forum, told the Washington Post, "We want to change the dynamic that women of color had been taken for granted for decades." Also, this morning on the Tom Joyner Morning Show, I talked to Leah Daltrey, longtime Democratic National Committee official, as well as Latasha Brown with Black Voters Matter. They were also participants in this particular event as well. 8 candidates, 8 of the 20 declared candidates showed up at the particular event. Now, here's the deal. Because of the way it was structured, they only had space for 8. And so it was the first 8 people who actually showed up, and that's who participated. And so we have put together a compilation of various comments made. First up is Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey.
The question, if you didn't hear it, is, well, I pledged to have a woman running mate. I will have a woman running mate. To me, it's really clear that we do that.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. And finally, in your first 100 days, how will women of color know that you're a president for us and our communities?
You know, this is something that, to me, is so apparent when you look at leaders, who they surround themselves with, who they put in positions of power, because inclusion is not an adornment. It's not something that just looks for the cameras and the TVs. We know from all the research, having inclusive teams around any leader is essential for having great teams that are effective and that get things done. And so in my first 100 days, you will see teams like I have had since I was the mayor of the city of Newark, since I got to the Senate and didn't just have diverse teams in my office, but made sure that we had more diverse teams in the Senate, to make sure that we are fighting for things like I am on my campaign, not just for diversity and inclusion, but hell, you can't campaign wrong and then think you're going to govern right. And so we talk about the issues that are legitimate and needed to be fought for in our community. And so by the team that I form and the actions that I take in my first 100 days, it will send a clear signal to my mom and to all the people in Newark, New Jersey who first put me in the game that I have not forgotten who I am, where I've come from, and the people that got me to where I am today.
All right, next up, another Texan, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Julián Castro. He was asked what he would do as president about gentrification.
I think we have to tackle this in many different ways that connects the dots. First of all, we need to make sure that there's a greater supply of affordable housing so that people can afford to live in their own neighborhood that they choose to live in. Secondly, we have to find ways to provide relief for the people that are there, the residents who are living there, so that they are not as impacted, for instance, as property taxes go up, as the cost of living in those neighborhoods go up. There have been a couple proposals, for instance, here in the Texas legislature on how you might provide property tax relief to help buffer low-income residents and prevent displacement. At the national level, I would encourage and invest in communities so that people could find affordable housing supply where they want to live, stay in these neighborhoods, and then be buffered against that kind of displacement. The other thing that we need to do, though, is enforce our Fair Housing Act. And when I was Secretary of HUD, we promulgated, or we passed the most groundbreaking rule called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, which was unfinished business from the 1968 Fair Housing Act, and basically said to communities that got federal taxpayer money through HUD, you have to get more serious about equal housing opportunity in your jurisdiction. So, we promulgated that rule. The first plans from cities started to come in October. I think it was October 4th of 2016. And then when Dr. Carson and the Trump administration got in, they actually put that on ice. If I'm president, one of the first things that I'm doing is making sure that we bring back affirmatively furthering fair housing so that every community has to answer for equal housing opportunity. And I believe that that's going to help to address this issue of gentrification.
All right, folks, next up is Hawaiian Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard.
A lot of us have just been reading through the Mueller reports, quite lengthy. But one of the things that it touched on was the ways in which Russia specifically targeted communities of color, impersonating Black Lives Matter, going after women of color, black women, and using that to divide the electorate and to discourage African American voters. And the second piece being literally targeting some of the voter rolls, going after voting systems in multiple states. Yeah. Do you believe that Russia is a threat to the voting rights of people of color?
I think Russia, what was done, as well as any other country that seeks to interfere in our democracy and in our elections, is unacceptable, and it has to be taken seriously for the threat that it provides. I think it's important, that second point that you made about actually trying to interfere in the voter rolls, in our elections systems. This is the huge vulnerability that threatens our next election that so far, unfortunately, has not been addressed. The fact that there are still many states in this country who don't have paper ballots or any kind of auditable paper trail to make sure that whether it's another country or an individual rogue actor comes in and tries to manipulate our votes, tries to change our votes to change the outcome of this election, our system is vulnerable to those hacks and attacks today. So I've introduced legislation in Congress called the Securing America's Elections Act. Very simply put, solves this problem by making sure that every single state either uses paper ballots or has a voter-verified paper backup, so that we in this country have an auditable paper trail to protect our democracy.
All right, folks, next up is California Senator Kamala Harris.
Criminalization of and contributed to the problem of mass incarceration in our country, and has led disproportionately to the criminalization of young black and brown men in this country. So there's that. There is the broader point about the failed war on drugs. There's no question it was a failure. And part of the problem was that what is essentially a public health issue became a criminal justice issue. And then now, thankfully, some have evolved around the opioid issue. But look, where were they when we had what was called the crack epidemic, right? And so we know that this is a system, in particular around the criminalization of drug use and possession, that has been infected by racial bias. And we have to speak truth about that. We have to speak truth in terms of the way that enforcement happened and what the result was in terms of mass incarceration. So one, we need to decriminalize and actually legalize marijuana use. Second, we need to deal with the real issue, which is the issue of undiagnosed, untreated trauma, in particular in poor communities and communities of color, which leads to predictable behaviors, including self-medication, because of a lack of public health resources in those communities, a lack of mental health resources in those communities. And I will tell you, as President of the United States, one of the things that I will implement is that we have mental health care on demand, and we have drug treatment on demand.
All right, folks, next up is Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar.
And you talked about, as a quick follow-up, having a law enforcement background and a background as a prosecutor. One of the reasons it's so rare for police officers to be convicted in cases like Philando Castile's and others, no matter what the circumstances, police officers get the automatic presumption, essentially a presumption that they are in the right so long as they can assert that they feared for their life. And it's really on the officer's word most of the time. At least that's the perception of most of the public. Do you support laws that give officers so much of a presumption of being in the right in shootings of unarmed civilians? Or should the laws be changed either to change that presumption and make there be more investigation, or to take the decision on prosecution out of the hands of prosecutors who are often working hand in hand with the police?
Okay, so a few things on that. Obviously, we should look at those laws. They're state by state, and I think they vary. But the things that I think are a problem, when I was a prosecutor, everything went to the grand jury. That's how we did it back then, when there was a shooting. And I think there needs some more accountability with the individual county attorney, in my case, prosecutor, looking at those cases themselves and owning what happens. I think the investigation should not be done by the police department where the officer worked. I feel very strongly, and I actually I actually took a stand on this way back when I had that job before, that shouldn't happen. So I think you have to have a fair process when you investigate these cases.
Here's a question former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke got from an audience member.
My name is Takiva Russell. I'm a member leader of Restaurant Opportunity Centers, and I'm a server in New Orleans where the minimum wage is just $2.13 an hour. What are your plans to ensure that all workers, including tip workers like me, get the full wages that we deserve so that we can feed our families without being harassed daily?
Thank you for the question, for offering your experience as an example for the urgency with which we must meet this challenge. So yes, I support a $15 minimum hourly wage in this country for everyone without exception, regardless of your occupation. I want to make sure that you are protected from harassment and intimidation in your place of work. So I want to strengthen those protections and the accountability and justice for those who violate the protections that are in place. But I also want to acknowledge that a minimum wage is not going to be enough, especially when it comes to women of color. Women alone in this country are paid 80 cents on average what a man is paid for the same job. But African American women, 61 cents of what a man is paid. Latinas, 53 cents of what a man is paid. We also need an equal rights amendment ratified in this country so that no woman can be discriminated against on any basis whatsoever. So those are the ways that I want to meet this challenge. Thank you.
Folks, next up is Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders.
And I think what the questioner is getting at is a phenomenon that is actually global. We're seeing it throughout Western Europe as well, as influxes of immigrants from the Middle East come in. You're seeing the same kinds of rises of white nationalism.
Well, let me just say a word on that. That's correct.
Yeah, so as president, what would you do to return the U.S. to global leadership on that issue?
Well, you reverse exactly what Trump is doing. Trump is a cowardly, authoritarian president who is he hides the reality that he has tried to throw 30-plus million people off health care, give huge tax breaks to billionaires, cut Medicare, cut Medicaid, and education. You can't win an election doing that. So what do? You do what demagogues in Europe and in this country have always done. You scapegoat. You go after immigrants. You go after people of color. You go after minorities. You say those people are the problem. It's not Wall Street. It's not the drug companies. It's not the insurance companies. It is undocumented immigrants. That is demagoguery. You're right. It exists in this country. It exists all over the world. And as President of the United States, our foreign policy will not be, as the current one is, to support authoritarian bigots all over the country. It will be a policy of supporting democracy and human rights.
Last up, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren. She was asked about black mothers dying in childbirth.
You know, I think everything that happens in government is ultimately about our values. But boy, nowhere do you see it more than measure the values that a country has by how it treats its mamas and its babies. And there is a specific problem, as you rightly identify, for women of color who are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth. And here's the thing. Even after we do the adjustments for income, for education, this is true across the board. This is true for well-educated African-American women, for wealthy African-American women. And the best studies that I've seen put it down to just one thing: prejudice. That doctors and nurses don't hear African-American women's medical issues the same way that they hear the same things from white women. And we got to change that, and we got to change it fast, because people's lives are at stake. So I got a plan I want to use. I want to talk to the hospitals, is where most of these births take place, and I want to talk to them in the language they understand: money. Well, here's what I'd like to change right now in maternal health, and that is to say the hospitals are just going to get a lump of money. And if they bring down those maternal mortality rates, then they get a bonus. And if they don't, then they're going to have money taken away from them.
Now, folks, you can actually go on MSNBC. They did not put this on television. They live streamed this whole event, so it's on their website. Also, in about 30 or so minutes, a number of the candidates are also going to be appearing at the African American Mayors Association. They're going to be actually having a forum there that's also happening in Houston. And so we're going to be sharing that video on our Facebook page as well. I want to start with you, Julián. This was critically important to focus like a laser on these issues affecting women of color to have this forum. I had sent an email last year, actually early this year, saying, hey, there should be one specifically for black women. And the black women should tell the Democratic National Committee, y'all know y'all need us. And so I believe there should be a debate. There should be a debate either this year or in 2020. It could be in North Carolina at Bennett. It can be at Spelman in Georgia. It could be at Florida A&M in Florida, all those battleground states. And I think the Democratic Party should do that. And let me also say this. It's a damn shame not a single black cable network carried this event.
Roland, you know, first of all, I agree with you on that. Somehow, some of our folks are not woke. Everybody Brown ain't down. This should have been carried live on the networks that will go unnamed right now. And kudos to you for making sure that we see this on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Secondly, you're absolutely right that there needs to be a conversation about black women, not women of color. Let me say this, black women. Because when we say women of color, we subsume a lot of things. The sister who stood up and talked about tip wages is an important conversation to raise, even as we have the Fair Wage Act that's been introduced, H.R. 1, talking about wages. And then you have these folks coming in and saying, well, maybe we should have a regional wage. When you have a regional wage, you disproportionately affect black women. A third of black women would be positively impacted if we were able to get the wage up to the $15 an hour. So I think it's important to have this kind of conversation. I think it's also important to drill down. I like the fact that this occurred at Texas Southern. I'm not so sure that I was in love with the format. You have them coming on one after the other, and kudos to the sisters who did it. But at the same time, let's think about how to compare and contrast people's views about something. Kamala always comes up wonderful. Bernie always screams. I don't know what Beto does, and I'm still not a fan. None of this is useful. It's just my thoughts.
Got it.
Useful at this point. But what's useful at this point is to recognize this constituency as a key constituency and to pay attention to it.
Michael.
No, absolutely. And it's important to not just have this one time, but it has to happen several times. And frankly, it could happen all over the country. It doesn't just happen in one place. But frankly, African-American women, to Dr. Malveau's point, not just women of color, but black women have really been the backbone of the Democratic Party, probably right before my father was chair. And then, frankly, when all the black women came in as members of Congress was when he was chair. And black women haven't really been rewarded like they need to be rewarded. And now it's time. Now our women are obviously smart, they're talented, they know the issues, they can fight. And whether they're at the top of the ticket or the number 2 on the ticket, either way, you will see, I think, a person of color on the ticket in 2020.
No, black person, Michael.
All right, Robert.
Oh, sorry, I've been correcting myself about that.
And Claire, I'm going to defer most of my comments to Dr. Malveau, who is the smart, educated, powerful black woman on the panel, so her word goes. But I think it's very important for us to have this conversation in areas of, for this one, of people of color, but also in primarily African-American spheres, because what we saw in the broader feminist movement, the Pink Hat movement, the Women's March movement, was the needs of African-American women being subsumed into the masses, that they will use your bodies, they'll use your energy, they'll use your organization, but the minute that Tamika Mallory says something that makes them mad, they're ready to pull funding and not willing to have these conversations. So let's keep this talk going. Let's have one for black women at Spelman or Bennett. Let's have one for black men at Morehouse or Clark Atlanta or Howard. Let's get all the candidates on record, and let's expand it out to all 20 of the Democratic candidates. Let's get Larry Hogan and Donald Trump and Bill Wells in there and find out what their agendas are too, so we can go into the voting booth with a completely informed and honest vote.
Robert, I was almost going to love you until you said, see
Real
what
quick.
Donald Trump says about black men. You know what he said about black men.
All right. All right, but the point is a critical point because I will say this here. The reality is we saw this during the election. There was a 9-point gap between black men and black women for Democrats in 2016 as well as in 2012. So it wasn't just a matter of Trump and Hillary Clinton. It also was Obama and Mitt Romney. So that's a critically important issue. Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.